So you gave me a list of events that you have lived through that are significant to Canada in a certain way. Sure. So the first question that I'd like to start off with is, how long have you lived in Canada?
74 years in Canada and 2 years in the States.
Right. So out of all of these events that you have given me, which event do you feel has had the biggest impact on you the most?
On me,
Yeah, on you personally.
definitely the Avro Arrow incident.
Okay.
Okay, well, it definitely affected our family very much because my dad had worked for Avro, when it was shut down and the project was canceled, of course, he lost the job. And because of his age in his 50s, at that time, he really never had a good job since then. So it affected Toronto very, very much from an economic and job perspective because there was, I think it was 14,000 that worked directly in the plant that were out of a job. So that probably affected me, our family, directly and the most. So as a kid, I used to hear the jets going over when they were testing them or flying them and hear the supersonic booms all the time. So it was really, really a part of our life in Toronto. And then the government canceled it in 1958, I think it was. 59. It was canceled by the Diefenbaker government. The thing that was bad about it was not only the economic effect on Toronto and the jobs lost and so on, but we lost our aircraft industry, and that company had been extremely, productive, and there was a real brain drain to Nassau.
Another thing I'd like to talk to you about is you gave me this other event that I've never heard of and I don't really know much about, and that is the October Crisis that took place in 1970. And I was wondering if you could explain that event because I don't know much about it. So.
Okay, well, back in the 1960s, this organization in Quebec, the FLQ, they really were promoting separatism, and they were quite a dangerous group, and they were doing a lot of bombings and robberies and so on and so forth, causing an awful lot of upheaval, not only in Quebec but throughout Canada, but especially in Quebec. And in October 1970, they kidnapped Pierre Laporte was his name.
Okay.
And he was a government, he was Minister of Immigration and Labor at the time, so he was a government official. They did end up killing him. Exactly when, I'm not sure. Within a week or so, they found his body, a week or two. And they also kidnapped a man by the name of James Cross, who was a British trade commissioner. They didn't kill him. He finally did get released. Okay. But that brought in the world, especially England and whatever. It became very, very noticeable. So Quebec was not having any success. Getting rid of this FLQ and the separatism and so on. So they called in the federal government, and Trudeau was the prime minister at the time. He called it a terrorist act and invoked the War Measures Act for the first time in peacetime, and probably the only time in peacetime. He outlawed the FLQ. He detained people. He sent in the army. Like we had the army in all the cities and so on, and trying to stop the riots and the demonstrations and everything like that. So that was the October Crisis. From the FLQ, we still ended up with a lot of political parties that wanted separation, and that went on for quite a few years. It was still a very serious topic in all of Canada, but especially in Quebec.
Another one that I want to talk to you about is the Fair Accommodation Practice Act that was passed in Dresden, and I think you told me that is like because you went and visited your uncle a lot down in Dresden, and I was just and I think you said that that was your first real experience
Yes.
witnessing racial discrimination.
Well, Dresden is a very small town down in southwestern Ontario with all farming communities around there, and it was one of the terminations of the Underground Railway when there was still slavery in the States, and they came up and crossed into Canada. And Dresden was a big terminus, and because it's very close to the States, and so there were a lot of black people in Dresden and in the surrounding areas. So like when I was a kid, I'd go down to visit my cousins and so on, and there were white baseball teams, there were black baseball teams, and it was very definitely whites only. Basically, it was supposed to be a white community, and they, didn't allow the black people in. So it was very much like the racial unrest in the States that was going on, but it was on obviously a smaller scale because it was only happening in certain areas of Canada. And finally, the Ontario government in 1954 voted in the Fair Accommodation Practice Act, which basically made racism illegal. Yeah, the kids went to the same school, which is interesting. Yeah. They weren't segregated in school, but in the rest of their life, everything else they did, they were segregated.
So, wrap up this interview. The last question I'd like to ask you is, did any of these events change the way you view Canada?
Yep.
Yeah.
They all did to a certain extent, but I think the one that I hate to say it, but I think it was the flag. Probably changed most people's view the most because it became a symbol that we were a country. We weren't just what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it. Anyways, it really built up the national image because after that we had "O Canada." Like when I was a kid, we didn't sing "O Canada." We sang "God Save the King" and "God Save the Queen." So it really showed we were a country, like at the Olympics and it to the world. And the flag was a big symbol of nationalism.
Yeah.
Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. But at the time, we were really considered a colony. But after the flag, I think our view in the world started to really change.
Oh, okay.
I think the flag was an impetus for that.
Yeah, thank you for agreeing to do this with me. So I think I'm gonna end this here. So see ya.
See you sometime in the future.